One of the things that I talk about, which I think is probably the most healing thing, is that I talk about trying to look at death from a different perspective. We're so sad and overwhelmed. We forget what it's really about. It's really about them going to the other side and being in a beautiful space where there's just love, and they haven't really left us. They're still like they've just shifted to a different dimension. And it's hard for our human brains and our human hearts to understand that because we just feel the loss. But they still very much connect with us. And I talk about this in my book. I also talk about, I give you tips for trying to deepen your own psychic abilities so that you can connect with your loved ones and get signs from them.
Welcome to The Reluctant Medium, where we cover the gamut of out there conversations. With an open mind and a curious heart, we want to talk about it all, from psychic phenomena and energy medicine to beings from other star systems and out-of-body experiences. You'll find a great balance between grounded science-backed topics and others that science hasn't quite caught up to yet. I'm your host, Dr. Maria Rothenberger, a psychotherapist by trade and a reluctant spirit baby communicator. And hey, even though I'm a medium, I'm not buying everything folks are selling. I just have a voracious appetite to know more about what I call the world of the weird. Join us on your favorite podcast platform or watch on YouTube at The Reluctant Medium. I'll see you there. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reluctant Medium podcast. I'm Dr. Maria Rothenberger, your host for the podcast. And today I have a fellow Ethereal Network podcaster with me. This is way too much fun. Melissa Oatman, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be a really good conversation. We are here to talk about your new book, although you do a lot of stuff. You do a lot of things in your work, but this is an amazing project that I can't wait to share with the world. So first, can you tell us who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so like you said, I do a lot of different things. I wear a lot of different hats, but by day, I'm a teacher. I teach German at high school. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a spiritual awakening. I call it my second spiritual awakening. And I decided to start a podcast because I started searching for answers to all of those questions in life. There has to be more to this. And so I started taking classes. So I became a Reiki practitioner. I do past life regression. I do readings for people. I do coaching work with people. And I also host Awaken Your Inner Awesomeness, which is a weekly podcast, which is why we got connected because we're both in the Ethereal Network. And that's basically what I do. So my life's pretty full with all of that.
I know, I was going to say, wait, do you sleep?
Yeah. Well, I also do travel agents. I'm a travel advisor too on the side because I want to start doing retreats and that. And I take students abroad. And so I was like, oh, I might as well add that to my repertoire too, because hey, just do all the fun stuff. Those are all the things I love to do.
Oh my gosh, that is way too much fun. Okay, so if you ever, I'm Maria Rothenberger, right? So I must go to Rothenburg, Germany. Yeah. Please, if you ever go.
I'm going there in just a few weeks, actually.
What?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
Students abroad, and that's one of the places we're staying overnight in Rothenburg. So yeah, is when I saw your name too, I was like, oh, Rothenburg. And then I heard it pronounced on your podcast. And I'm like, oh no, it's not pronounced the German way.
No, I don't. I haven't pronounced it the German way, but I pronounce it the wrong way.
Well, it's your name. I don't know how it can be wrong, but I love that. Yeah. That's so funny that you said that because I'm going to be there in just a few weeks. So
that's amazing.
A postcard or something.
Oh, that's awesome. I know that they have a live webcam in their downtown area with the little clock tower, not little, big clock tower and everything. It looks so much fun. I don't know. You wouldn't know this, but my dad was born in Germany and moved here when he was 14. My whole dad's side of the family, they all speak German. My Oma and Opa come to me regularly. Love them. So anyway, side note, you have, on top of everything else, you added the project of writing a book. I know from personal experience how much work that is. So what happened? What happened to inspire you to write A Beautiful Mourning is what it's called. A Beautiful
Yeah.
Mourning, A Guide to Life After Loss.
So I
Tell us about that.
experienced a lot of loss in just a short amount of time. It started in 2019. My great aunt, who lived next door to me growing up, and was like my grandma because my mom was a single mom and had to work. And so we would go spend the night with her while my mom was working nights. She was sang in a lounge at the Holiday Inn, which was kind of fun. They would take us to go hear her sing. She passed away in September of 2019. And then in February of 2020, a couple of weeks after my kid's 18th birthday, their dad committed suicide.
Oh my.
And then COVID happened. And that was their graduation year. So they didn't have a senior prom. Their graduation, our school district did an amazing job with graduation because they gave them the red carpet treatment and they came in one at a time and got their diplomas and they made it a big deal, which was nice because I know a lot of schools just handed kids their diploma and said, here you go, and they didn't have a graduation. But then we're going through all of that. COVID happened. And in June of 2020, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And at first they told us she can beat this because it's in a good spot and we can do this. And I truly believe had she gotten this at any other time and it wasn't COVID, she might have survived. But she passed away in January of 2022. And my grandma, her mother, who I was also very close to, she also helped watch us, she passed away a year before that. And she was in a nursing home with COVID. And so there were that many losses all at one time. And felt like I needed to, everything I do, because I have another book too, starts off as like a cathartic journal for myself, just to get through the healing process. And then I'm like, you know what? Other people might benefit from this too. So I wrote the story about my journey in losing all of those people and the grief process. I talk about what the stages of grief are. And I give people tools and tips for how to work through the different stages to try to get through it with a little more grace and ease. The main thing is to let people know, like, you're not alone. Grief can make you feel like you're going crazy and it changes your life completely, especially if you've lost someone really close to you. So I talk about that journey and that process of it's almost like you have to reinvent yourself because your life changes so drastically.
Yeah, you're never the same.
No. And so that's why I wrote it. That's how it came to be, because I wanted other people to have something that they could go to that might make them feel just a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk about some of those details. And I'm thinking immediately of people who have lost their mother specifically, that I think they need your book. I want to show you something because as I was getting dressed this morning, getting ready, I grabbed a piece of jewelry that when I saw, and I was just like looking up your book, and when I saw the title and the cover of your book, I flipped out. So let me just show people. I want to share my screen for a second because your book won't totally show up on your screen with your background. So I just want to show people first this screen. And I'm going to zoom in here. Okay. Look at this book cover. This is gorgeous. Okay. Now look at the piece of jewelry that I picked up this morning to wear. Can you see it?
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. That looks just like the cover.
It looks exactly like the cover.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The significance of this pendant is this was a gift from a client. I wrote in my book about the Japanese concept of kintsugi. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, is that the pottery? Okay, so I wanted to show my first book. I don't know if it'll show up, but my first book, the cover is this person is got cracks all in them, and then it's gold coming through them. Because that was my first book is Beautifully Broken. And I said, you have to be broken open and the light come in to make you whole again. Not that we're ever really broken, but you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
The light comes in and heals you and makes you more beautiful than you were before. And so that was the concept for my first cover. So that's hilarious. That's crazy.
You can't make this shit up, right?
No, you cannot. Definitely.
I know. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm inspired to wear this particular necklace. And then I look up your book and saw that. And I was like, whoa. So that's one of the questions I was going to ask you too, as you talk about your book and some of the tips or the ways that folks can take care of themselves. I'm wondering about your spiritual stuff, your awakening and your connection to the other side and how that relates and your inspiration for things like this. I mean, it seems small, but what? It
Yeah.
doesn't, I mean, it seems like more than coincidence, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, can you riff about that? What are some things that folks can take away right now, just how to support themselves, or what's in your book that you're willing to share?
Well, one of the things that I talk about, which I think is probably the most healing thing, is that I talk about trying to look at death from a different perspective. We're so sad and overwhelmed. We forget what it's really about. It's really about them going to the other side and being in a beautiful space where there's just love, and they haven't really left us. They're still like they've just shifted to a different dimension. And it's hard for our human brains and our human hearts to understand that because we just feel the loss. But they still very much connect with us. And I talk about this in my book. I also talk about, I give you tips for trying to deepen your own psychic abilities so that you can connect with your loved ones and get signs from them. And I talk about how my mom connected with music. She was a singer. She loved Patsy Cline, and she used to sing it all the time. She would sing at festivals, and she won contests. And about, I think it was a week after she died, maybe the week that we were preparing for her funeral, my daughter was driving home, and my daughter does not listen to country, and especially not 1950s country or whatever. And she had Spotify on. Well, what does Spotify do? It takes your musical taste and it puts other music, like it plays the music according to those genres. Crazy by Patsy Cline came on when she was driving home on Spotify. She called me right away and said, Mom, that had to be Nana. I don't listen to country. I was like, it had to be. And also the very next week, Crazy became a song that people were using in their videos for TikTok. And I was like, okay, why did they just suddenly pick a 1950s song, country song, as their background music? I'm like, no, because my mom knew we're all on TikTok and we're all watching that. Like, that's how I get your attention. Another thing was she used to love the song You Are My Sunshine, and she would sing it. She was a teacher too. She would teach it to her classes. They would sing it. And I even got a tattoo on my arm with the sunflower that says You Are My Sunshine. Also, the week that she died, my best friend's mom, she was so sweet. She bought us presents as comfort. Sorry for your loss. It was a blanket. It said to my daughter, and it said, You are my sunshine. And it had the flower on. I was like, okay. She had no idea that this was the song that my mom would sing. And just different things would come up like that, where we would say, okay, that has to be her. So I try to teach people, and I'll tell another story that hits home for this, that if we could look at death in a different way, and instead of mourning for ourselves, which you do, but if we could shift it and say we're happy for our loved ones who get to go on and be in this wonderful place. One of the things that really helped me was we were in the hospital the day she died. We had to make the decision to take her off life support. And she wasn't conscious, but we were all surrounding her. And when she passed, she knew the minister she wanted to do the service. So I called him to let him know that, hey, my mom passed away. And he said, oh, Melissa, if we could only see what she's seeing right now. And that sort of took me out of my own head. It took me out of the ego part of myself and made me go, oh my gosh, yeah, she's not in pain anymore. She suffered a lot. And so I had to think, even if I could bring her back, that would be for selfish reasons. It would be because I want to hug, I want to be comforted. I wouldn't want to bring her back because she was so miserable at the end. And we have to, I say this in the book too, the grieving, even though of course we're going to, is really like a selfish thing. Like we grieve for ourselves because we're hurting and we want that loved one But suffering is a human condition that they don't have on the other side. And so if we could look at it from a different perspective and say, I'm happy for my loved one who was met by all of their deceased relatives, by their angels, guides, had a huge celebration, and we'll all have that one day and we'll see them again. It eases the pain just a little bit.
Yeah. I always imagine, ooh, I'm finally going to get to fly. I wonder if they're flying.
Yeah, because you always have those dreams and it feels so fun. And you wake up like, ugh, I don't get to fly.
Oh, man. I want to do that again. Why did that dream have to end?
Right.
But I think that you make a good point, right? Because it's not one or the other. It's not like, oh, not that. So I subscribe to the notion that a little bit of selfishness ain't no problem. Be a little bit selfish is fine. That's the human condition, as you said, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's both, right? Yeah, of course you're going to grieve that person and also add in that other piece about their freedom and their big celebration and meeting their guides and angels and whomever else.
Yeah. And knowing that you can still communicate with them. They still hear you. I probably look like a crazy person, but I'll be walking around the house and something happens. I'll be like, did you see that, Mom?
Yep.
But asking for signs because they can definitely send you signs and show you that they're still around you, just in a different form, which is one of the things that I talk about in the book is if you really want to deepen your connection, because everyone has psychic abilities, we just aren't aware of them a lot of times. So when you can deepen those ability to talk about the different types that there are and activities you can do to help deepen that connection so that you can feel them around you, because you can, I still feel the love that she had for me, even though she's not here.
Can you speak to that a little bit? What are the different types of abilities and what's one way or whatever, top 2 ways that folks can tune in or tap into those?
So you have the clairaudience, which is where you can hear things. And for example, one night I was going to bed, I was laying down, and this is usually when I'll get the most connection to her, because when you're going to sleep, your brain's kind of in that alpha state. And so you're more likely to be able to connect. I heard her say my name just like she was sitting next to me. And I sat up a little bit, but I knew that was a sign. Some people have the claircognizance where you just know things, like things pop. And that's the way that I usually connect, although I'm also more of an empath. So I feel things and I can feel energy when it's around me. And like I'll do a reading for someone and I'll just start crying because they're crying. Like they have that. It's so overwhelming and emotional, and I can tap into that. Other people will see spirit, they'll see energy. That's not really how I connect. I have before, but that's not really the main way that I do. Mine is more feeling and knowing. So when I channel, I'll do readings on TikTok or Facebook. And when I channel, I'm just like thoughts are popping into my head, but I know they're not from my own brain.
Yep.
And when I connect to people, that's the same. That's how it works for me is I just start saying stuff, and it's usually how the person is feeling. That's not something I can look up on Facebook and see. So that's how I connect and can get messages for people. And so sometimes I'll just be going about my day, and in my own head, I just will hear like, I love you. And I know it's from her. It's like they can send us thoughts. And that's how I get guidance sometimes too. Of like, what should I do in this situation? I'll just hear, you need to do X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, okay. And I wasn't smart enough to think about that. So it had to come from guides or something. But there are a lot of different ways you can connect. And in the book, I talk about all of the different ways and the activities that you can do, because there are practice activities you can do to really deepen the connection that you have.
Yeah. What's one thing that you think people can implement right away? This is how you can deepen that connection or improve your ability a little bit more.
I think connecting to your intuition. So one of the ways that you can do that is wherever you are, just sit in stillness, and then you take a deep breath and then say to yourself, no. And then feel where you feel that in your body. So you just keep saying no to yourself. For me personally, it feels like a heaviness in my chest. It feels like I just had a weight on my chest. And then you can do the same thing. Take a deep breath and then say yes. Yes. Where do you feel that in your body? And I feel it in my stomach, like butterflies in my stomach. When you do that, you can connect to your intuition. So you can ask yourself questions like, would this be for my highest good? And wherever you feel that in your body, it's like, oh, nope, that's a no for me. Or yes, that's a yes for me. When you start connecting to your own intuition, then I think you can start deepening those abilities because you start to trust yourself. And the big thing about people who try to develop their psychic abilities is they don't trust that it's what they're getting. They're like, oh, I just made that up. Oh, I just said that. But one of the ways that we had to practice is just to work with someone that you really don't know, and you just sit in front of them and you just tell them what you're being given. And that's the best way to practice because they're going to tell you, no, that doesn't make sense, or yes, that does make sense. And you just keep doing it until you get, sometimes you'll have that, your own ego trying to interrupt and say, no, say this. But when you're really listening to your intuition and your higher self, you're not going to be steered wrong. So it's about learning to trust that, trust what you're being given. Some people will say, well, that wasn't a sign. And I like that meme on Facebook where they're like, Spirit, show me a sign. And it's a girl laying on the ground with a stop sign laying on top of her. It's like, but where's my sign? But that's how we are. The universe tries to give us signs all the time and we just don't see them because we're not in tune or being present in our everyday life. So it really takes doing that too and trusting that, oh yeah, that is a sign.
It's true. I still do that. And I do this work. I'm like, I don't know if what's coming through is accurate, but here's what it is.
Yeah.
And more often than not, it's, yeah, that's accurate. I'm curious about, okay, so I'm going to tell you a sign story for me, and then I'm curious about what comes after. So I did an interview with another medium recently for my podcast, and she was talking about signs. Now, that day, I had felt like my grandpa was around. My grandpa always had this very gentle demeanor. He was not like, "Papow, here's a stop sign flat on your body," right? He wasn't like that. But there's two things about him that they're absolutely signs from him. And she said both of them. I went, what? How? What? Okay, so now I can now recognize the signs. And I used to say, well, I still say it. I like to ask for signs at least 3 times before I believe it's real, right? Yeah. But if it's a super papal sign, I'll be like, okay. So like her saying both of the signs from my grandpa at the same time or one right after the other, that to me was papal enough. But my question to you is, well, what then? Like, let's say that I got a sign from grandpa. Well, was he just saying hi? What do I do with that? Do you have suggestions for that?
Sometimes I think it is just to let you know I'm here and I'm watching over you. I know my grandpa, I never met him before I was born. He died a few years before I was born. And I would drive, before I had a job where I'd have to drive an hour to and from work. And I would be in the car by myself and all of a sudden I would smell cigarette smoke. I don't smoke. There's nobody in the car. And when my daughter was a baby, I was rocking her. She was old enough to talk. Maybe she was 1.5 years, 2 years old. I was rocking her to sleep at night, and she's waving and laughing at the corner where there's no one, because just the two of us, and it's a dark room. And I said, who are you waving at? Who are you laughing at? And she said, Papa Phil, which is what she used to call my dad's partner. So I was like, okay, that's a little weird. We went over to my grandma's house the next day and she pointed to a picture of my grandpa and said, Papa Till. So
I just got the chills.
Yeah. And then I had a medium tell me, your grandpa is always around you and your daughter. He protects you and watches over you. So sometimes I think they're watching over us and they just want us to know, hey, I'm here. Sometimes it might be a warning like, hey, pay attention. Like if you're in the car, it might be pay extra close attention, what's going on around you. They can't intervene, but because we have free will and we have to ask for that, but they can try to help us, like warn us. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just, I'm here, I love you, I'm protecting you. And sometimes I think this is one thing that I've done before when something's happening and I need help, but I don't know what to do. I stop what I'm doing and ask my guides and any departed loved ones who can step in to help. And it's amazing what happens when you do that. Like I had a flat tire the other day on the highway and couldn't figure out there were like nuts on that looked like you had to have a key to take the lock off of it. And that ended up not being the case. It just said the wrong thing in the manual and we were just trying to figure it out. A guy just pulled up behind us and had it changed in no time flat and was just the nicest person. They will try to help us in our everyday lives. And that's one of the ways they show us they're still here. Sometimes your loved ones go on and become your guide while you're here. Not every loved one does, but some do. And sometimes they can just step in and guide you in certain areas of your life. They are always trying to let us know that they're still here. And I think one of the biggest lessons is just that we need to learn to appreciate life, because so many times people are like, oh, I hate it here. Oh, this is horrible. And you should be privileged that you came here, because this is like a school. Earth is the school, and we're learning so many lessons. And that's why it can be so difficult and can feel like a struggle. But you chose to come here to elevate your soul really quickly. And so if you're listening to this podcast, obviously you're on that journey of trying to become a better person, I feel like. And so you should really be proud of yourself, because this is really not easy. And we have, our loved ones, I think sometimes losing them, we have lessons that we learn, like to appreciate your life. Now I tell my children every time I talk to them, I love you, make sure they know. So we learn to value life. We learn to live it to its fullest, because you're not guaranteed a single second. And no one should spend their life just feeling stuck and miserable. I always feel like death is sometimes a reminder that you need to live your life to the fullest, that love deeply, because that's why we came here, to learn how to love. It does hurt when you lose a loved one, but it's because that love was so deep. And you were privileged to experience a love like that. I know I was.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say two things that are under the same umbrella of our loved ones helping us evolve. They're helping us evolve by their physical absence, and they're helping us evolve by us asking for their assistance from the other side. You said they can't intervene, but we can ask them and then they can?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Because we have free will. And same with your guides too. They're here to help. But we often just, when something happens, get frustrated and throw our hands up and get aggravated and try to figure it out ourselves. We were sent an entire spiritual team to help us get through our daily lives, but we'd never ask for help because we're just too stubborn, right? We want to figure it out ourselves. You can ask for help at any time and for any little thing. I know people who, when they lose things, they're like, oh, okay, I need help finding this. And so they'll call on St. Anthony. I know that's a very Catholic thing. And that's fine. It's the same concept. You call on your spiritual team, ask for guidance, ask for help, and then ignore it when the sign's laid on top of you. But we can definitely ask for help and guidance. And they love helping us, but most of the time we just don't ask.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter how mundane, right? I have a friend who was like, every time you're in the car with me, I find a parking spot. And I'm like, yep.
It doesn't. Even like the weather, even with the weather. And we went on vacation and we were at the beach and it showed it was going to be storming and raining and crappy the entire time we were there. And I was like, oh no. So I was like, okay, angels and guides, please, we're at the beach. We finally get a vacation. And it rained that first day and then cleared up and was fine the rest of the time. So it can be as mundane as everything. Whether you believe in that or not, I do because I've had enough proof in my life that things can change. A lot of people, we stress about financial things, for example, in life. You can ask for help with that too. I've had checks show up that I'm like, where did this come from? One example was I bought my niece a pair of slippers. I don't know if you remember the Stompies that were popular a few years ago. I bought her a pair, didn't think anything of it. And a few years later, I get this check in the mail for $250 because somebody sued them. And it was like a class action lawsuit. And I never signed up for it, but because I had purchased them, and I guess they had a record of that. And it was during a time where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to cover this. And that just showed up. They can make things happen. It's so crazy, honestly. And you don't believe it, just try it. Just try it.
Yeah. I like to say that. It's like when you play with it and well, let me just put it out there. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Everything stays the same. Okay. But when you play with it, and I've actually found that too with connecting with others with souls on the other side. That's what they're encouraging us to do, is like, just play. Let's play. Let's play with this.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
And you get a game, it can be really fun to see like, oh, what can I make happen today? Because I think that's really what they want you to see, is that life can be magical, and it should be. And you're very powerful, whether you know it or not. And that's where people feel so often like there's no control in life because they have to go to a job they don't like, or they have to do this. They have to. You hear people all the time, I have to, I have to, I have to. Well, you don't. You always have choice. But we've just become a society where we don't think we have a choice, and we feel like, well, I've been doing the same job for 20 years, so now I have to do it. You don't. You can wake up tomorrow and say, I want something different. And it's never too late. But we've been conditioned to believe that we don't have any power. We're very powerful. You're powerful in your thoughts and your words and your actions and your deeds. So it's really important to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. So I'm curious about just leaving folks with a final sort of, obviously you and I are in a different, like, oh my gosh, we've seen this way too many times to not believe it. So we just manifest, right? Or we just connect with the other side, right? And we ask for help and we say hello and we ask for those signs. But for folks who are deep in loss, and the concept of loss in your book is definitely losing people. I happen to be in the fertility world, and there's a lot of loss inherent in that, right? Just the ability to conceive with your partner in the privacy of your room or whatever. That's a loss, but also pregnancy loss or infant loss, or, it's really difficult. And so to move to that place of, well, just ask for assistance or just manifest or just is really difficult. Yeah. So I'm wondering about any words of wisdom you have around how can people start? What's something that people can do to start supporting themselves and moving toward that place of trust?
Yeah, and I talk about this. Grief isn't just about losing a person. You could be grieving because you lost a job, you lost a relationship. I mean, there's so many different reasons that we grieve. So this book isn't just for someone who's lost a person. It can be for anything that you're grieving. The most important thing is to acknowledge your grief. That's step number one. Acknowledge that you are grieving. There is no timeline for grief. There's no expiration date. And I always say, you're going to grieve the rest of your life for that person. You just are. But it gets easier. And the only way that it can is if you actually process your emotions and what you're feeling. Because a lot of people get in that, and I understand why, because as a society, we go, okay, you get 3 days off of work for bereavement, and then you got to go right back at it, and you got to go to work. And those first few days after you lose someone, it's like a blur. Because I remember as soon as my mom died, they were saying, you need to sign this paperwork so you can get the funeral home to come and get her body. And you need to do this. And we had to go to the funeral home. We had to pick out an urn for her. We had to pick out an outfit for her viewing. We had to make arrangements for a funeral dinner. Like, we had to do all of these things. And there's so much stuff. And then when you're at the wake, you're consoling everyone else. they're coming up to you bawling and crying, and you're trying to be strong for everybody else. And I say this, it's such a blur. I don't even remember who was at her wake. I don't remember all the people who came because it's such an emotional time, and you're still kind of in shock. You don't start, to me, the actual grieving process until everything dies down because you just don't have time. And it's those weeks, days, months after the funeral that are the hardest because people stop reaching out and people expect you to get on with life and to go back to life as usual. That's not possible because your life isn't normal anymore. Like now you have to figure out what that is. So it's important to actually sit down, which is why in the book I talk about the stages of grief. And I want people to understand it's not linear. You don't move through each thing in like a week or a month. You go back and forth many times and you can feel like you're okay. And then all of a sudden a trigger happens. Like I was at the doctor's office a year after my mom died, and they told me to look over my form and make sure everything was okay. And she was my emergency contact, and I started bawling. And I was like, I need to change my emergency contact. And it was embarrassing, but they were very kind. But little things will trigger you, like opening up your Netflix account and seeing that their profile is still there. Those little things can really, like I had to turn off my mom's cell phone because we were on the same cell phone plan. And the guy kept saying, are you sure you want to do this? Because someone else is going to get her number. And I was like, I understand what you're trying to tell me, but I can't just pay $60 a month because I need to memorialize her number. But if you feel like that's something you want to do, that's okay too. There's no right or wrong way. But those little things that you have to face every single day, that's when it's really hard. And so in my book, I talk about how to get through those moments when those kinds of things happen. The most important thing is really, because for me, anger was a big emotion. I was very angry at losing my mom at 69 years old. It felt unfair, like we didn't have a long enough time. But you have to process that. So for me, it was the writing. That's how journaling is a great way, but I give you other tools and tips for how to get through that anger. If you're not a person who writes, I get it. There are a lot of people who say, I don't like writing. That's okay. There are other ways you can process it, but you have to get through it, because I also talk about my brother didn't process it and it's been a mess. Like you can completely self-destruct if you do not process it in a healthy way. People who don't can sometimes lean on addictions, get into unhealthy relationships, all kinds of things, because they don't process what they're feeling. And they always say, if you don't heal, you bleed all over people who didn't cut you. Well, that's exactly what happens. And so you have to process it. There's just no way around it.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've heard of the grief recovery method, but they talk about this concept of STIRBs. It's an acronym for short-term energy releasing behaviors. So all those things that you're talking about, the addiction, the things. I love music. I'm a musician myself, and I didn't realize that I would use music to avoid the pain. So you're saying we need to sit with the pain, look at it, process it, feel it, all those things.
So uncomfortable, but you have to do it because it doesn't go anywhere. If you don't process it, it gets stuck in your body, stored emotion in your body. And then from doing Reiki, people who have that stored and stuck energy or emotion in the body, it turns into disease in the body. It turns into physical pain because your body has to process that somehow. Do you want it to be emotional pain, physical? It's gonna come out in some way. And I also talk about that at least if you decide, okay, I'm going to sit with it, I'm going to process it, you get to decide how you're going to do it. But if you don't, and I tell this story in my book, but one time we were at a drag show, decided to go. We're like, oh, this will be so fun. There was a bachelorette party there that night. One of the women in the bachelorette party was going through a divorce, and she was just crying and sobbing the whole night. And it's like, she is not having fun. And then the drag queen zeroed in on her and was like, well, making fun of her because she was crying and not having fun. And we felt so sorry for this girl. But I talk about that because if you don't process your emotions when and where you choose, that's what happens. You'll be out in public having a drink, and then all of a sudden it's like, everything spills out. So you really want to be able to process it comfortably in a way that feels good to you, instead of, because like I said, if you don't, it's going to come out. It will be embarrassing if you're out in public and you're drinking and then all of a sudden you're just bawling all over the place. So that's why, another reason it's really important to process it.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be alone. Certainly could be with other people, but maybe not that venue.
Right. Maybe
that
privately. No, it's great if you have someone that you trust that you can talk to. And, counseling is such a great tool too, because I know my sister and I went to group counseling, the grief counseling, and then I went individually too and talked to a counselor. And that helped a lot because it's somebody that you can talk to without judgment, who just listens to you. And if I would say to my family and friends, for example, like, I'm really mad because I think the doctors didn't do the best job they could have, they would say, they did everything they could and you need to let that go. Here's the thing, your feelings, no matter what you feel, are valid, and you need to be able to express that. Now, sometimes after we express that, we realize maybe they're not the most rational, but it's still valid that you feel angry, and you have a right to feel angry. You've got to get that out. And so processing that really helps, because then you're not holding on to that, and it's anger and bitterness can eat you alive. And I read some studies where they're linking that to like high blood pressure and other kinds of diseases. So it's important really to process the emotions that you're feeling.
Yeah. I love how you look at it from an energetic standpoint too, right? Like this energy becomes a stuck energy and there's a physical representation of that. And so it sounds like you approach grief from mind, body, spirit, energy.
Yes.
Approach.
Because, and I talk about this too. Look, when we want to manifest things, you have to be vibrating on a high frequency energetically. And high frequency emotions are like joy, happiness, peace, those kinds of things. And the low vibrational frequencies are anger, resentment, those kinds of things. Of course, you're going to feel it. But that's another reason to process it too, because when our energy vibrates at a higher level, we feel better. And we attract better things just naturally. So it's important for that reason too, to try to process.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate your insights on this. I just want to quick acknowledge the folks also who don't have a ritual like a wake or those kinds of things for their losses. Like no one's creating a funeral for the loss of a job or the loss of a pregnancy. In fact, a lot of people will just not say anything at all. So I just want to acknowledge that piece. That's also part of the grief. Nobody's really acknowledging how is life going on right now. That's a huge piece. Well, I have melissaoatman.com. And your podcast is Awaken Your Inner Awesomeness. So people can find you in those areas. Is there anywhere else that people can find you? Or are those the best places?
Those are probably the best, but I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I do readings on all of those places, and YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. You can find my podcast there, and also my readings that I do are also on YouTube.
Wow, you are all over the place. And if people want to learn German, go back to high school.
Yeah. Or contact me. I can do private lessons too. We can work.
Oh, heck yeah, that'll do. Melissa, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining the Reluctant Medium podcast today. I hope you found this episode helpful. You can connect with me at thereluctantmedium.us, where you can find lots of free content as well as readings. You can also find free meditations on the Insight Timer app and join me and lots of like-minded folks on the Miracles Happen community on the Mighty Networks app. Just search for the Miracles Happen community. All links are also in the show notes. Thanks so much again for joining today. I will see you next time. This podcast is part of the Ethereal Network of podcasts. Look for us also on Ethereal TV.